Do you know how the first humans arrived in Australia? Welcome to our channel, where we explore the fascinating journey of early humans, their culture, survival, and deep connection to the land. Join us as we uncover stories of resilience, innovation, and the incredible legacy of Australia's first people. Part 1. The journey from Africa to Southeast Asia. The story of human evolution in Australia begins with the migration of early Homo sapiens from Africa, a process that unfolded over tens of thousands of years. To understand the significance of this migration, it is essential to start with the origins of Homo sapiens and the broader evolutionary history that set the stage for this incredible journey. Around 200,000 years ago, the first anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, emerged in Africa. By this point, human evolution had already seen several other hominin species, such as Homo erectus and Homo habilis, spread across Africa and Eurasia. Homo sapiens, however, possessed a suite of behavioral and cognitive abilities that allowed them to thrive in diverse environments, adapt to different climates, and eventually spread across the globe. Genetic evidence suggests that Homo sapiens first left Africa between 70,000 and 50,000 years ago, embarking on a series of migrations that would lead them to every continent except Antarctica. The reasons for this exodus are not entirely clear. Some scientists propose that changes in climate or competition for resources may have driven Homo sapiens to explore new territories. Others argue that the cognitive revolution, marked by advancements in language, abstract thinking, and social organization, enabled early humans to innovate and survive in ways that no other hominin had. This period of migration is sometimes referred to as the out of Africa hypothesis, and it represents one of the most pivotal moments in human history. The first steps of this migration were primarily through the Horn of Africa and into the Arabian Peninsula. From there, early humans followed two major routes, one along the southern coastline of Asia, which led to Southeast Asia and eventually Australia, and another through the Levant into Europe and Central Asia. The southern coastal route, which concerns us in this context, was likely facilitated by a combination of changing sea levels, favorable environmental conditions, and the development of new technologies, including watercraft. One of the key challenges faced by early Homo sapiens was crossing large bodies of water. While many parts of the world were connected by land bridges during periods of lower sea levels, Australia remained isolated from mainland Asia by the Wallace Line, a biogeographical boundary that separates the unique ecosystems of Australia from those of Southeast Asia. Crossing the Wallace Line would have required early humans to possess both navigational skills and the means to travel across open water. This is where the mystery of maritime exploration comes into play. By the time Homo sapiens reached Southeast Asia, they had already encountered and interbred with other hominin species, such as the Neanderthals and the Denisovans. This genetic exchange likely provided early humans with beneficial traits that aided their survival in different environments. For instance, Denisovan genes have been linked to adaptations for high-altitude living, which would have been useful for populations living in the mountainous regions of Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia itself was a critical waypoint in the journey toward Australia. The region was home to a diverse range of ecosystems, including tropical rainforests, savannas, and coastal areas, each offering different resources and challenges. Early humans had to adapt to these environments, developing new tools, hunting strategies, and social structures to survive. Archaeological evidence from sites like Nia Cave in Borneo and the Leong Bua Cave on the island of Flores indicates that Homo sapiens and other hominins lived in Southeast Asia during this period. However, the most remarkable aspect of this journey is the crossing of the seas to reach Australia. Archaeologists and anthropologists have long debated how the first humans managed to cross the Wallace Line. The theory that they used boats or rafts has gained considerable support, but the exact nature of these watercraft remains unknown. Some speculate that they constructed simple bamboo rafts, while others propose more sophisticated designs involving dugout canoes or lashed-together logs. Regardless of the specific method, the crossing to Australia was no small feat. The distances involved, combined with the unpredictable nature of ocean currents and weather patterns, would have posed significant risks. Yet, early humans were able to make these crossings, possibly in multiple waves over several generations. Genetic evidence suggests that the ancestors of modern indigenous Australians began arriving in Australia around 50,000 years ago, marking one of the earliest known examples of long-distance maritime migration. The motivations behind this migration are also a matter of speculation. Some researchers propose that early humans were driven by a combination of necessity and curiosity. Changes in climate, including periods of extreme drought in Africa and Asia, may have pushed populations to seek new lands. Alternatively, they may have been motivated by the search for food, following the migration patterns of animals, or looking for more favorable environments. It's also possible that social and cultural factors played a role, with small groups of explorers venturing into the unknown as part of a broader human tendency toward exploration and expansion. Upon arriving in Australia, these early humans encountered an entirely new world. Australia was home to a unique ecosystem, shaped by millions of years of isolation from the rest of the world. The flora and fauna of Australia were unlike anything the early humans had seen before, with many species found nowhere else on Earth. This included the famous Australian megafauna, such as giant kangaroos, wombats the size of small cars, and flightless birds like Genyornis, which stood over 2 meters tall. The arrival of humans in Australia had a profound impact on this ecosystem. As hunter-gatherers, early humans relied on the natural resources of the land to survive. They hunted animals, gathered plants, and used fire to manage the landscape. Their presence likely contributed to the extinction of many of the megafauna species that had thrived in Australia for millions of years. However, the extent to which humans were responsible for these extinctions is still debated among scientists, with some arguing that climate change also played a significant role. In addition to the environmental changes brought about by human activity, the arrival of humans in Australia also marked the beginning of a long and complex cultural history. Over the next tens of thousands of years, the indigenous peoples of Australia would develop rich and diverse cultures, deeply connected to the land and its unique ecosystems. The story of human evolution in Australia is not just one of survival and adaptation, but also one of cultural innovation, social organization, and the development of complex spiritual beliefs. This first part of the narrative sets the stage for the detailed exploration of how humans arrived in Australia and adapted to its unique environment. It highlights the significance of the out-of-Africa migration, the challenges of maritime exploration, and the profound impact that humans had on the Australian landscape. In the subsequent parts of this story, we will explore the interactions between early humans and the Australian environment, the development of cultural practices, and the enduring legacy of the first Australians. Part 2. The Mystery of Maritime Exploration. The journey of early humans from Southeast Asia to Australia marks one of the most remarkable achievements in prehistoric human history. Part 2 delves into the mystery of how early Homo sapiens managed to cross vast expanses of open water, particularly the Wallace Line, a deep-sea barrier that separates the islands of Southeast Asia from Australasia. Theories of early maritime exploration, including the use of watercraft, navigation techniques, and social organization, are key elements in this part of the narrative. While much about these crossings remains speculative, evidence from archaeology, genetics, and ethnography helps piece together a picture of one of the earliest examples of human seafaring. The Wallace Line, named after the naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace, marks a biogeographical divide between the species of Southeast Asia and those of Australia and New Guinea. The Wallace Line runs through Indonesia, separating the islands of Borneo, Bali, and Sumatra to the west, which were connected to mainland Asia during the Pleistocene, from the islands of Lombok, Flores, and Timor to the east, which remained isolated. This boundary represents not only a geographical challenge, but also an ecological one. The fauna of Australia, for instance, evolved independently, leading to the existence of marsupials like kangaroos and wombats, which were absent in Southeast Asia. Crossing the Wallace Line would have been a significant undertaking for early humans. Archaeologists and anthropologists have long debated how these migrations occurred. The key question centers on whether Homo sapiens of this period possessed the cognitive and technological capabilities required for open sea travel. Today, the distance from Timor, the easternmost island of Southeast Asia, to northern Australia is approximately 400 kilometers of open ocean, though sea levels were lower during the Ice Age, reducing this distance somewhat. Nevertheless, crossing such vast distances over water would have required planning, innovation, and cooperation. The most widely accepted theory is that these early humans used some form of watercraft to navigate the waters between the islands of Southeast Asia and Australia. But what exactly did these watercraft look like? Unfortunately, no physical evidence of boats or rafts from this period has survived. The perishable materials that would have been used, wood, bamboo, and fibers, do not typically endure for tens of thousands of years. Instead, researchers must rely on indirect evidence, such as stone tools, shell middens, and genetic studies, to reconstruct these early seafaring activities. One plausible scenario is that early humans used simple bamboo rafts. Bamboo, which grows abundantly in many parts of Southeast Asia, is a light and buoyant material that could have been lashed together to create a sturdy, floating platform. Ethnographic studies of traditional raft-building techniques among indigenous peoples of Southeast Asia provide insights into how these early rafts might have been constructed. Alternatively, dugout canoes, which are made by hollowing out large logs, could have been used. While more complex to make than rafts, dugout canoes offer greater control over direction and speed, especially in coastal or open sea environments. Navigation would have posed another challenge. Early humans likely did not have the sophisticated navigational tools we associate with later maritime cultures, such as the Polynesians, who used the stars, ocean currents, and bird migration patterns to guide them across the Pacific. Instead, early seafarers might have relied on more rudimentary methods. For example, they could have used visible landmarks, such as the distant outline of an island or a plume of volcanic smoke, to navigate. Additionally, the seasonal monsoon winds and currents in Southeast Asia might have provided a natural means of propulsion, allowing rafts or canoes to drift in the desired direction. While it is tempting to imagine a deliberate, large-scale expedition, it is more likely that these early sea crossings occurred over generations, with small groups making short, exploratory trips between islands. Once the first humans reached an island, they could have settled there temporarily before moving on to the next, eventually reaching Australia. This gradual island-hopping approach would have allowed early humans to adapt to new environments, develop navigational skills, and refine their watercraft building techniques. The arrival of humans in Australia around 50,000 years ago represents not just a remarkable feat of maritime exploration, but also a major turning point in human history. The first Australians were pioneers, venturing into a continent that had never before been inhabited by humans. The success of their journey was likely the result of a combination of factors: technological innovation, environmental knowledge, social cooperation, and perhaps even a bit of luck. One of the most fascinating aspects of this migration is the role that social organization must have played. Long-distance sea crossings would have required cooperation and planning, suggesting that early Homo sapiens had developed complex social structures and communication systems. Building watercraft, organizing food and supplies for the journey, and coordinating group efforts to navigate uncharted waters would have demanded high levels of collaboration. This, in turn, implies that early human societies were already capable of significant cultural and technological innovation by the time they reached Southeast Asia. Another intriguing line of evidence comes from genetics. Studies of modern indigenous Australian populations, as well as ancient DNA from archaeological remains, suggest that the first Australians arrived in multiple waves of migration. This would mean that the crossing of the Wallace Line was not a one-time event, but rather a series of migrations over thousands of years. Each wave of migrants brought with them new cultural practices, technologies, and possibly even different genetic adaptations, contributing to the rich diversity of Australia's indigenous populations. Archaeological evidence from sites in northern Australia provides further clues about the early human occupation of the continent. Some of the oldest known sites include Majd Beeb in the Northern Territory, which has been dated to at least 65,000 years ago, and the nearby site of Nowalabla, dated to around 50,000 years ago. These sites contain stone tools, ochre, used for body painting or rock art, and the remains of hearths, all of which suggest that early humans were well adapted to their new environment. Interestingly, the tools found at these sites show a continuity with those from Southeast Asia, indicating that the first Australians brought with them a technological toolkit that they adapted to the unique challenges of the Australian landscape. The crossing of the Wallace Line and the arrival of humans in Australia also had a profound impact on the continent's ecosystem. As mentioned in Part 1, Australia was home to a range of megafauna, including giant marsupials, reptiles, and birds. The arrival of humans likely contributed to the extinction of many of these species, though the exact extent of human involvement is still debated. Some researchers argue that climate change, particularly the onset of arid conditions toward the end of the Pleistocene, played a more significant role in the megafauna extinctions. Others point to the overhunting of large animals by humans as the primary cause. Regardless of the exact cause, the extinction of Australia's megafauna would have had a ripple effect on the continent's ecosystems. With the disappearance of large herbivores and predators, the balance of plant and animal communities shifted, leading to the development of new ecological relationships. Early humans played a key role in this transformation, not only through hunting but also through their use of fire to manage the landscape. The practice of firestick farming, which involved the controlled burning of vegetation to promote new growth and attract game, would become a hallmark of indigenous Australian land management for tens of thousands of years. The mystery of maritime exploration to Australia also has broader implications for our understanding of human evolution and migration. The ability to cross open water suggests that early Homo sapiens possessed a level of cognitive flexibility and technological ingenuity that allowed them to colonize even the most remote and challenging environments. This capacity for exploration, adaptation, and innovation is a defining feature of our species and helps explain why Homo sapiens, rather than any other hominin species, became the dominant force in the ancient world. In conclusion, the crossing of the Wallace Line and the arrival of humans in Australia represents one of the earliest examples of maritime exploration in human history. While many details about how these early sea crossings were accomplished remain shrouded in mystery, the evidence we have paints a picture of a resourceful and innovative people capable of adapting to new challenges and environments. These early pioneers set the stage for the rich cultural and ecological history of Australia, a story that will continue to unfold in the subsequent parts of this narrative. Part 3. The Land of Sahul. When early humans first set foot on what is now Australia, the continent was not quite as we know it today. Rather, it was part of a larger landmass known as Sahul, which included present-day Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania. This vast landmass was accessible due to lower sea levels during the Pleistocene epoch, creating a continuous expanse of land that allowed human populations to spread across what is now separated by significant bodies of water. In Part 3, we explore the geographical and ecological context of Sahul, the challenges and opportunities it presented to the first human settlers, and the gradual adaptation that these early Australians underwent as they established themselves across this new territory. Sahul was connected to Southeast Asia via the Sunda Shelf, which included the islands of Indonesia and other parts of modern-day Southeast Asia. While Sahul was never directly connected to the Asian mainland, the significantly lower sea levels of the Pleistocene exposed a larger expanse of land, reducing the distance between islands and the mainland. This allowed early humans to island hop, eventually making their way to the larger landmass of Sahul. However, crossing the last significant body of water, even with lower sea levels, was no small feat, as discussed in Part 2. Upon arrival in Sahul, early humans were confronted with an entirely new set of environmental conditions. Australia's ecosystems were vastly different from the tropical and subtropical environments they had experienced in Southeast Asia. Sahul presented a patchwork of environments, ranging from coastal mangroves and rainforests to expansive arid deserts in the interior. The continent's biodiversity was also unique, shaped by millions of years of isolation from other parts of the world. One of the first challenges for early humans was understanding and adapting to Sahul's climate. The Pleistocene epoch was characterized by repeated cycles of glaciation and warming, with the last glacial maximum occurring around 20,000 years ago. These climate fluctuations led to significant shifts in the landscape, particularly in the availability of water and resources. Early humans would have had to track these changes carefully, adjusting their movements and survival strategies in response to the ever-shifting conditions. The northern part of Sahul, corresponding to modern-day New Guinea, was characterized by tropical rainforests and mountainous regions. It provided rich resources, such as fruits, nuts, and game animals, that would have sustained early human populations. However, the challenges of navigating dense forests and steep mountain ranges would have required the development of specialized tools and techniques for hunting and gathering. This region also provided access to valuable materials like stone, wood, and plant fibers, which could be used to create tools, shelter, and clothing. Moving south into present-day Australia, early humans encountered a vastly different environment. Much of the land was covered by open grasslands, savannas, and scrublands, with vast arid regions in the interior. These arid zones, which we now know as the Australian outback, were some of the harshest environments on Earth. The early inhabitants of Sahul had to learn how to survive in these dry, hot regions, where water and food were often scarce. This adaptation required not only physical endurance, but also a deep understanding of the landscape and its seasonal cycles. Archaeological evidence suggests that early humans in Sahul moved quickly to explore and settle across the continent. Sites dating back over 50,000 years have been found across Australia, from the tropical north to the temperate south. This rapid dispersal indicates that these early settlers were highly mobile, taking advantage of the diverse resources available in different parts of the continent. For instance, in the coastal regions, they exploited marine resources like fish, shellfish, and seabirds, while inland they hunted large terrestrial animals and gathered plant foods. One of the key features of Sahul's environment was its unique fauna. At the time of human arrival, the continent was home to an array of megafauna, giant animals that had evolved in isolation from the rest of the world. These included Diprotodon, a massive marsupial that resembled a giant wombat, Procoptodon, a giant short-faced kangaroo, and Megalania, a gigantic carnivorous lizard. The presence of these megafauna would have provided both opportunities and challenges for early human settlers. On the one hand, these large animals could provide substantial amounts of meat, hides, and bones for tools. On the other hand, they were formidable and potentially dangerous, requiring innovative hunting strategies and cooperation among early human groups. The interaction between early humans and the megafauna of Sahul remains a topic of intense scientific debate. Some researchers argue that humans played a significant role in the extinction of these species through overhunting, a theory known as the Blitzkrieg hypothesis. Others suggest that climate change, particularly the drying of the continent at the end of the Pleistocene, was the primary driver of these extinctions. What is clear, however, is that within a few thousand years of human arrival, many of Sahul's largest animals had disappeared. This loss of megafauna would have had significant ecological consequences, as well as implications for human survival strategies. As early humans spread across Sahul, they developed a range of technologies and cultural practices to adapt to the diverse environments they encountered. Stone tool technology, for example, evolved to suit the specific needs of different regions. In the tropical north, small, finely crafted stone blades were used for hunting and processing plant materials, while in the arid interior, larger, more robust tools were needed for working with tougher materials like wood and animal hides. These technological adaptations reflect the resourcefulness and ingenuity of early Australian settlers. In addition to technological innovations, early humans in Sahul developed complex social and cultural systems. Evidence from archaeological sites, including burial practices, rock art, and the distribution of artifacts, suggests that early Australians had established long-distance trade networks and social alliances across the continent. These networks would have been crucial for the exchange of resources, knowledge, and cultural practices, allowing groups to survive in the often harsh and unpredictable environments of Sahul. One of the most remarkable aspects of human adaptation in Sahul is the use of fire as a tool for managing the landscape. Early Australians practiced what is known as fire stick farming, a technique in which controlled burns were used to clear vegetation, promote the growth of new plants, and create hunting grounds. This practice not only helped to manage the risk of large, uncontrolled wildfires, but also created a mosaic of different habitats, which could support a greater diversity of plant and animal life. The use of fire to shape the environment demonstrates the deep connection that early Australians had with their landscape and their sophisticated understanding of ecological processes. The transition from Sahul's lush northern rainforests to its arid southern deserts required a remarkable degree of flexibility and innovation. The ability of early humans to adapt to such diverse environments speaks to their resilience and ingenuity. This adaptability allowed them to spread across the entire landmass of Sahul, from the tropical coasts of New Guinea to the icy peaks of Tasmania, and everywhere in between. In the southern regions of Sahul, which include modern-day Tasmania, the environment was more temperate, with cooler climates and seasonal variations in resources. These regions would have provided a stark contrast to the arid interior, offering abundant forests, rivers, and lakes that early humans could exploit for food and materials. The Tasmanian region was eventually isolated from mainland Australia when sea levels rose again around 10,000 years ago, creating the island of Tasmania. The people who settled in this region developed their own distinct cultural practices, adapted to the cooler and wetter conditions of the southern latitudes. As the early human populations in Sahul grew and spread, they left behind a rich archaeological record that continues to inform our understanding of their lives. Sites like Lake Mungo in southeastern Australia provide some of the earliest evidence of human occupation in the region, including the remains of hearths, stone tools, and the famous Mungo Man and Mungo Woman burials. These ancient graves, which are over 40,000 years old, offer invaluable insights into the cultural and spiritual practices of early Australians. The adaptation to the diverse and often harsh environments of Sahul represents one of the most remarkable chapters in the story of human evolution. The ability of early humans to survive and thrive in such a wide range of ecological zones demonstrates their resilience, innovation, and deep connection to the land. As we move forward in this narrative, we will explore the interaction between these early Australians and the continent's unique megafauna, the development of cultural and social systems, and the lasting legacy of the first Australians on the land of Sahul. Part 4. The Megafauna of Pleistocene Australia. By the time the first humans arrived in Australia, they found themselves sharing the land with an extraordinary array of animals. These were not the creatures we associate with modern Australia, such as kangaroos, koalas, and emus, but rather enormous, now extinct versions of them, Australia's unique Pleistocene megafauna. This term refers to the giant animals that lived during the Pleistocene epoch, which lasted from about 2.6 million years ago to 11,700 years ago. The interaction between these early humans and the megafauna of the continent is one of the most fascinating and contentious subjects in the history of human evolution in Australia. When the first humans arrived, the continent was home to more than a dozen species of large animals, some of which were much larger than anything found in Australia today. These included Diprotodon, the largest marsupial that ever lived, weighing as much as 2,700 kilograms, almost 6,000 pounds, and Procoptodon, a giant short-faced kangaroo that stood over 2 meters tall. Other notable species included the massive, wombat-like Zygomaturus, the ferocious giant lizard Megalania, and the flightless bird Genyornis. which weighed up to 230 kilograms, 500 pounds. One of the most compelling aspects of this period is the question of how early humans interacted with these animals. The megafauna were integral parts of the ecosystems of Pleistocene Australia, and understanding their extinction is a key part of understanding the early human history of the continent. There are two dominant hypotheses regarding the cause of their extinction: the overkill hypothesis, which suggests that humans hunted them to extinction, and the climate change hypothesis, which proposes that environmental changes, particularly increasing aridity at the end of the Pleistocene, were the main cause. The overkill hypothesis argues that the arrival of humans had a catastrophic impact on Australia's megafauna. According to this theory, humans, being highly effective hunters, rapidly reduced the populations of these large animals. The megafauna had evolved in isolation for millions of years, and they had no experience with human predators, making them particularly vulnerable to hunting. Furthermore, many of these animals had slow reproductive rates, making it difficult for their populations to recover once they started to decline. The strongest evidence for the overkill hypothesis comes from archaeological sites where human tools and megafauna remains have been found together, suggesting that early humans hunted these animals. Some researchers argue that the extinction of the megafauna occurred shortly after humans arrived in Australia, with the largest animals disappearing within a few thousand years of human settlement. This timeline suggests a direct correlation between human arrival and the decline of the megafauna, supporting the idea that hunting played a significant role in their extinction. However, the overkill hypothesis is not without its critics. Some researchers argue that the evidence for widespread hunting of megafauna by early humans is limited. While there are some sites where human tools and megafauna remains have been found together, these sites are relatively few in number, and they do not necessarily prove that humans were responsible for the extinction of these species. Additionally, the fact that the extinction of the megafauna occurred over thousands of years suggests that it may have been caused by multiple factors, rather than a sudden overhunting event. This brings us to the climate change hypothesis. During the Pleistocene, Australia experienced significant climatic fluctuations, including periods of extreme aridity. As the last glacial maximum approached around 20,000 years ago, the continent became drier and more inhospitable. Large parts of Australia were transformed into deserts or semi-arid landscapes, drastically reducing the availability of water and food for the megafauna. Proponents of the climate change hypothesis argue that these environmental changes, rather than human activity, were the primary cause of the megafauna extinctions. According to this view, the megafauna were already struggling to survive in the increasingly arid conditions of Pleistocene Australia. The combination of reduced food availability, shrinking habitats, and the physiological stress of living in a hotter, drier climate would have made it difficult for these large animals to maintain stable populations. In this context, human activity, such as hunting or landscape burning, may have been a contributing factor but not the primary cause of their extinction. Recent research has also pointed to the possibility that both climate change and human activity played roles in the extinction of Australia's megafauna. It is possible that the increasingly harsh environmental conditions put pressure on megafauna populations, making them more vulnerable to hunting by humans. In this scenario, the arrival of humans would have been the final blow to already weakened megafauna populations. This combined impact hypothesis suggests that the extinction of the megafauna was the result of a complex interplay between natural and human factors. One of the most significant pieces of evidence for the climate change hypothesis comes from studies of megafauna fossils and sediment cores, which provide information about past environmental conditions. Analysis of ancient pollen, charcoal, and other environmental markers indicates that Australia experienced significant changes in vegetation and fire regimes during the late Pleistocene. These changes would have affected the availability of food for large herbivores like Diprotodon and Procoptodon, as well as the predators that relied on them, such as Megalania. The extinction of the megafauna would have had profound effects on the ecosystems of Australia. Many of these large animals played important ecological roles as grazers, browsers, and predators. Their disappearance would have led to changes in vegetation patterns, the distribution of smaller animals, and the overall structure of ecosystems. For example, the loss of large herbivores may have contributed to the spread of certain plant species, while the disappearance of top predators could have allowed smaller carnivores to proliferate. From a human perspective, the extinction of the megafauna would have had significant cultural and economic implications. For the first Australians, these large animals would have been important sources of food, materials, and possibly even spiritual or cultural significance. The loss of the megafauna would have forced early human populations to adapt their hunting and gathering strategies, focusing on smaller animals and plant resources. This shift in subsistence patterns is reflected in the archaeological record, where we see changes in tool technology and the types of animals being hunted over time. Another important aspect of the interaction between early humans and the megafauna is the role of fire in shaping the landscape. As discussed in earlier parts, early Australians used fire as a tool for managing the environment, a practice known as firestick farming. This technique involved setting controlled fires to clear vegetation, promote the growth of new plants, and create hunting grounds for smaller animals. The use of fire may have also contributed to the decline of the megafauna by altering their habitats and reducing the availability of food. For example, the spread of fire-adapted plant species, such as grasses and shrubs, may have replaced the dense forests and woodlands that some of the megafauna relied on for food. In turn, this could have led to a decline in the populations of large herbivores, which would have had cascading effects throughout the ecosystem. This hypothesis suggests that the use of fire by humans was not only a tool for managing the landscape, but also a factor that contributed to the broader environmental changes taking place in Australia during the late Pleistocene. Despite the ongoing debate about the causes of the megafauna extinction, it is clear that early humans had a profound impact on the ecosystems of Australia. Whether through direct hunting, the use of fire, or other forms of environmental modification, the arrival of humans marked the beginning of a new chapter in the continent's ecological history. The extinction of the megafauna, combined with the changing climate, would have set the stage for the development of the unique flora and fauna that characterize modern Australia. In conclusion, the interaction between early humans and the megafauna of Pleistocene Australia remains one of the most intriguing and complex aspects of the continent's ancient history. While the exact causes of the megafauna extinction are still debated, it is likely that a combination of human activity and climate change played a role. The arrival of humans in Australia not only transformed the continent's ecosystems, but also forced early Australians to adapt to a rapidly changing environment. The legacy of these interactions continues to shape our understanding of human evolution and the development of Australia's unique landscapes. Part 5. The first settlements and tools. By the time early humans arrived in Australia, they had already developed sophisticated tools and technologies for survival, honed over tens of thousands of years during their migration from Africa through Southeast Asia. These innovations were key to their ability to adapt to the unique environments of Australia, from its arid deserts to its lush rainforests and coastal regions. In this part of the narrative, we explore the archaeological evidence of the first settlements in Australia, the development of tools and technologies, and how these early humans adapted to the diverse environments of the continent. One of the most important archaeological sites for understanding the arrival and settlement of early humans in Australia is the Lake Mungo region in New South Wales. This area, part of the Willandra Lake system, has provided some of the earliest evidence of human occupation in Australia, with dates stretching back as far as 50,000 years. The site is significant not only for its age, but also for the variety of cultural artifacts and human remains that have been uncovered there, including the famous Mungo Man and Mungo Woman burials. The tools found at Lake Mungo and other early sites across Australia provide insight into the technological capabilities of these first settlers. Stone tools were a critical part of early human survival, and the tools discovered at these sites reflect a variety of uses, including hunting, gathering, processing food, and building shelters. These tools were made primarily from local materials, such as quartz, chert, and silkrete, and were crafted using techniques that had been passed down through generations. One of the most common types of tools found at these early sites are flake tools, which were created by striking a stone core with another object, usually a hammerstone, to produce sharp-edged flakes. These flakes were then used for a variety of purposes, including cutting, scraping, and piercing. The simplicity of these tools belies their effectiveness, as they could be easily produced and adapted for different tasks. Other tools, such as scrapers and points, suggest that early humans were hunting and processing animal hides, as well as working with wood and other materials. The diversity of tools found across Australia reflects the wide range of environments that early humans encountered and the need for technological innovation to survive in different regions. For example, in the coastal areas, where fishing and shellfish gathering were important food sources, specialized tools like fishhooks, harpoons, and nets may have been used. In the arid interior, where water and food were scarcer, tools for digging and processing plant roots and tubers became essential. As early humans spread across Australia, they established settlements in a variety of environments, from the coastal regions to the inland deserts. These settlements were often temporary, as early Australians were primarily nomadic hunter-gatherers, moving from place to place in search of food and water. However, some areas, such as the fertile river valleys and coastal estuaries, may have supported more permanent or semi-permanent settlements, particularly during times of abundance. The development of these settlements would have required careful planning and resource management. Early humans needed to balance their need for food and water with the demands of their environment. In many parts of Australia, particularly in the interior, water sources were scarce, and early humans had to develop strategies for finding and conserving water. This might have involved the use of water holes, natural springs, or the digging of wells. In coastal areas, where resources were more plentiful, early humans would have relied on fishing, shellfish gathering, and hunting marine animals, supplementing their diets with plants and small land animals. In addition to hunting and gathering, early Australians practiced what is known as firestick farming, a technique that involved the controlled use of fire to manage the landscape. By setting small, controlled fires, early humans could clear away old vegetation and promote the growth of new plants, which in turn attracted animals to the area. This practice not only helped to ensure a steady supply of food, but also reduced the risk of larger, uncontrolled wildfires. Firestick farming was particularly important in the arid regions of Australia, where resources were scarce, and managing the landscape efficiently was essential for survival. The early Australians also developed a deep knowledge of the plants and animals in their environment, learning which species were edible, which were dangerous, and how to harvest resources sustainably. This knowledge was passed down through generations, often in the form of oral traditions, stories, and songs. These traditions formed the basis of a rich cultural heritage that continues to this day among Indigenous Australian communities. The burial practices of early Australians provide further insights into their social and cultural life. The discovery of Mungo Man and Mungo Woman at the Lake Mungo site is particularly significant, as it provides some of the earliest evidence of ritual burial in Australia. Mungo Woman, who was cremated before her remains were buried, is one of the oldest known examples of cremation in the world. Mungo Man, who was buried in an extended position with his hands crossed over his pelvis, suggests that early Australians had complex beliefs about death and the afterlife. The care and attention given to these burials indicate that early humans in Australia had developed sophisticated social structures and spiritual beliefs. The presence of ochre, a naturally occurring pigment, at many early archaeological sites, including Lake Mungo, also suggests that early Australians engaged in symbolic or ritualistic practices. Ochre was used for a variety of purposes, including body painting, rock art, and burial rituals. Its widespread use indicates that it played an important role in the cultural and spiritual life of early Australians. The discovery of ochre at sites far from its natural source also suggests that early humans in Australia engaged in long-distance trade or exchange networks, sharing resources and ideas across vast distances. As early humans adapted to the diverse environments of Australia, they also began to develop distinct cultural practices and traditions. While there was likely some degree of cultural continuity across the continent, different regions would have developed their own unique customs and technologies based on the specific challenges and opportunities of their environment. For example, the people of the tropical north, with its abundance of water and food, may have developed more complex social structures and art forms, while the people of the arid interior would have focused on survival strategies and resource management. The rock art of northern Australia, particularly in Arnhem Land and the Kimberley region, provides some of the earliest and most striking examples of indigenous Australian art. These paintings, which date back tens of thousands of years, depict animals, humans, and mythical figures in vibrant colors. The rock art is not only a testament to the artistic skill of early Australians but also provides valuable insights into their spiritual beliefs and relationship with the land. Many of the paintings depict animals that are now extinct, such as the Tasmanian tiger and the Genyornis, providing further evidence of the early human presence in Australia and their interaction with the megafauna. As early humans continued to spread across Australia, they developed increasingly sophisticated tools and technologies to meet the demands of their environment. This period of technological innovation, which is often referred to as the Australian Stone Age, saw the development of new types of tools, including ground-edge axes, spear throwers, known as woomeras, and boomerangs. These tools allowed early Australians to hunt more efficiently, process food more effectively, and engage in complex social and cultural practices. The development of ground-edge axes, in particular, represents a significant technological advancement. Unlike earlier flake tools, which were made by striking a stone core, ground-edge axes were made by grinding a stone into the desired shape using abrasive materials like sand or water. This process allowed for greater precision and durability, making the axes more effective for tasks like cutting wood and processing animal hides. Ground-edge axes have been found at sites across Australia, dating back as far as 35,000 years, making them some of the oldest examples of ground stone tools in the world. The spear thrower, or woomera, was another important innovation. This device allowed early Australians to throw spears with greater force and accuracy, making it easier to hunt fast-moving or dangerous animals. The woomera also served as a multi-purpose tool, often used for digging, carrying food, or even as a shield in combat. The development of the woomera reflects the ingenuity and adaptability of early Australians, who were able to modify and improve their tools to meet the specific needs of their environment. Boomerangs, one of the most iconic tools associated with indigenous Australian culture, were used for a variety of purposes, including hunting, digging, and even as musical instruments. While not all boomerangs were designed to return to the thrower, the development of the returning boomerang is a testament to the skill and precision of early Australian toolmakers. Boomerangs were particularly useful for hunting birds, as they could be thrown at a flock, stunning or killing multiple animals with a single throw. In conclusion, the first settlements and tools of early humans in Australia reflect their remarkable ability to adapt to a wide range of environments and challenges. Through technological innovation, social cooperation, and a deep understanding of their surroundings, early Australians were able to thrive in some of the most diverse and challenging landscapes on Earth. The archaeological evidence from sites like Lake Mungo provides valuable insights into the daily lives, cultural practices, and spiritual beliefs of these early settlers, while their tools and technologies reveal their ingenuity and adaptability. As we move forward in this narrative, we will continue to explore how early Australians adapted to the changing environments of their continent and developed the rich cultural traditions that continue to thrive today. Part 6. The expansion across Australia. After the initial arrival of early humans in Sahul, the combined landmass of Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania, these early settlers began to spread rapidly across the vast and varied landscapes of the continent. Their expansion was driven by a combination of environmental pressures, resource availability, and perhaps a cultural predisposition for exploration and adaptation. This part of the narrative examines the rapid dispersal of early humans throughout Australia, the challenges they faced as they moved into different ecological zones, and the unique adaptations they developed in response to these challenges. One of the most remarkable aspects of the human expansion across Australia is the speed with which it occurred. Archaeological evidence suggests that within a relatively short time after their arrival, perhaps only a few thousand years, early humans had reached every corner of the continent, from the tropical north to the arid interior, the temperate southeast, and even the island of Tasmania. This rapid dispersal is impressive, given the size of the Australian landmass and the diversity of environments it contains. The motivation for this rapid expansion may have been multifaceted. On one hand, it is possible that early human populations grew quickly, leading to increased competition for resources and prompting groups to move into new areas in search of food, water, and space. On the other hand, the cultural and technological adaptations of these early humans may have made them highly mobile, capable of exploring and settling new regions with relative ease. Additionally, a deep curiosity and desire to explore new territories, a trait that has been a hallmark of human behavior throughout history, could have driven these early migrations. As early humans spread across Australia, they encountered a wide range of environments, each with its own set of challenges and opportunities. In the tropical north, where the climate was hot and humid, they found lush rainforests, rivers, and abundant wildlife. This region, corresponding to modern-day northern Australia and New Guinea, was rich in resources, including fruits, nuts, fish, and game animals. The early settlers here adapted by developing tools and techniques for hunting and gathering in a tropical environment. They made use of rivers and wetlands for fishing and trapping aquatic animals, while also gathering fruits and plant materials from the forest. Moving southward, early humans encountered the vast and arid interior of Australia, a region that would become known as the outback. The harsh conditions of the desert presented significant challenges for survival, including extreme temperatures, scarce water sources, and limited food. Yet, archaeological evidence shows that early humans adapted remarkably well to these conditions. They developed sophisticated strategies for locating and conserving water, including the use of natural springs, waterholes, and underground reservoirs. In some cases, they may have dug wells or used tools to extract water from plants. The ability to manage water resources was critical for survival in the arid interior, and early humans developed a deep understanding of the seasonal cycles and natural patterns of the land. They learned to track the movements of animals, locate edible plants, and predict the availability of water. In some regions, they may have practiced seasonal migration, moving between areas depending on the availability of resources at different times of the year. The expansion into the arid interior also required new technological innovations. Tools for hunting, gathering, and processing food had to be adapted to the harsh conditions. For example, the spear thrower, or woomera, allowed early Australians to hunt larger animals with greater accuracy and from a distance, reducing the risk of injury or exhaustion. The development of digging sticks and other tools for extracting plant roots and tubers helped them access food sources that were hidden beneath the dry soil. One of the most important adaptations to the arid interior was the practice of fire stick farming, which we explored in earlier parts. By using controlled fires to manage the landscape, early humans were able to promote the growth of new vegetation, attract animals for hunting, and reduce the risk of larger, more destructive wildfires. This practice not only helped ensure a steady supply of food, but also transformed the landscape, creating a mosaic of different habitats that supported a greater diversity of plant and animal life. As early humans moved further south, they encountered temperate regions with more moderate climates and abundant resources. The southeastern part of Australia, which includes modern-day Victoria and New South Wales, was a region of forests, grasslands, and coastal estuaries. These areas provided rich hunting and fishing grounds, as well as access to a wide variety of plant foods. Archaeological sites in this region, such as Lake Mungo, provide evidence of early human settlements that date back over 40,000 years. The coastal regions of Australia were particularly important for early human populations. The abundance of marine resources, including fish, shellfish, and seabirds, provided a reliable and relatively stable food source. Coastal estuaries and river systems also supported rich ecosystems of plants and animals, making these areas ideal for settlement. Evidence from archaeological sites along the coasts suggests that early humans engaged in fishing, gathering shellfish, and hunting marine mammals such as seals and dugongs. In addition to exploiting marine resources, early Australians in the coastal regions developed technologies for working with materials like wood, stone, and shell. These materials were used to create tools, weapons, and ornaments, many of which have been preserved in archaeological sites. For example, shell middens, large piles of discarded shells, provide evidence of long-term occupation and resource use in coastal areas. These middens, along with stone tools and other artifacts, help researchers understand the daily lives and subsistence strategies of early coastal communities. As early humans expanded across Australia, they also spread into the southern island of Tasmania, which was connected to the mainland by a land bridge during the Pleistocene. Tasmania's cooler, temperate climate and rugged terrain presented its own set of challenges, but early humans adapted by exploiting the island's forests, rivers, and coastal resources. The people of Tasmania developed their own distinct cultural practices and technologies, shaped by the unique conditions of their environment. The archaeological record from Tasmania provides evidence of a long and continuous human presence, with tools and artifacts dating back over 35,000 years. As sea levels rose at the end of the Pleistocene, the land bridge between Tasmania and mainland Australia was submerged, isolating the people of Tasmania from the rest of the continent. Despite this isolation, they continued to thrive, developing a unique cultural identity that was closely tied to the land and its resources. The rapid expansion of early humans across Australia was not just a story of survival and adaptation, it was also a story of cultural and social development. As groups spread into different regions, they began to develop distinct cultural traditions, languages, and belief systems. These cultural differences were shaped by the specific challenges and opportunities of their environments, but they were also influenced by long-distance interactions between groups. Trade networks and social alliances allowed early Australians to share resources, knowledge, and ideas across vast distances. Evidence of trade can be seen in the distribution of materials like ochre, which was used for body painting, rock art, and ritual purposes. Ochre from specific regions has been found at archaeological sites far from its source, suggesting that it was traded over long distances. Other materials, such as stone for tool-making, may have also been exchanged between groups. In addition to trade, early Australians engaged in ceremonial gatherings and social exchanges that helped to maintain relationships between different groups. These gatherings, which may have included feasting, dancing, and ritual performances, were important for fostering social cohesion and cooperation. They also provided opportunities for the exchange of knowledge, including information about hunting strategies, seasonal cycles, and landscape management practices. The expansion of early humans across Australia was a dynamic and complex process, shaped by environmental challenges, technological innovations, and cultural developments. The ability to adapt to such a wide range of environments, from the tropical rainforests of the north to the arid deserts of the interior and the temperate forests of the south, speaks to the resilience and ingenuity of these early settlers. Their rapid dispersal across the continent, combined with the development of distinct regional cultures and technologies, laid the foundation for the rich and diverse cultural heritage that continues to thrive among indigenous Australian communities today. As we move forward in this narrative, we will explore how early Australians continued to adapt to their changing environments, including the role of fire in landscape management, the development of social and cultural systems, and the enduring legacy of their relationship with the land. Part 7. The role of fire in landscape management. The arrival of early humans in Australia marked the beginning of a long and profound relationship between people and the environment. One of the most significant ways that early Australians interacted with their landscape was through the use of fire. Unlike in many other parts of the world, where fire was primarily a tool for cooking and warmth, in Australia, fire was also used as a method of landscape management. This practice, known as firestick farming, played a critical role in shaping the ecosystems of Australia, and had a lasting impact on both the environment and the cultural practices of Indigenous Australians. Firestick farming refers to the intentional use of controlled burns to manage vegetation, promote the growth of desirable plants, and create more favorable conditions for hunting. This practice was not only a survival strategy, but also a form of environmental stewardship that reflected a deep understanding of the ecological processes at work in the Australian landscape. By carefully managing fire, early Australians were able to transform their environment in ways that supported their subsistence needs, while also maintaining the health of the ecosystem. The origins of firestick farming are difficult to pinpoint, but it is likely that early Australians began using fire as a tool for landscape management shortly after their arrival on the continent. The practice was well suited to the unique conditions of Australia, where much of the landscape was prone to wildfires due to the dry climate and the flammability of native vegetation. By setting small, controlled fires, early humans were able to reduce the accumulation of dry fuel, such as dead grass and fallen leaves, which could otherwise lead to large, uncontrollable wildfires. Firestick farming had a number of ecological benefits. First, it helped to promote the growth of new vegetation by clearing away old, dead plants and creating space for new growth. This was particularly important in regions where early humans relied on plant foods, such as tubers, roots, and grasses. By burning away old vegetation, they were able to encourage the regrowth of these important food sources, ensuring a steady supply of edible plants throughout the year. Second, the use of fire created a mosaic of different habitats, which supported a greater diversity of plant and animal life. By burning small patches of land in a controlled manner, early Australians were able to create a patchwork of open grasslands, woodlands, and dense forests. This diversity of habitats attracted a wide variety of animals, including kangaroos, wallabies, and emus, which were important sources of food for early humans. The new growth that emerged after a fire was particularly attractive to herbivores, which would come to graze on the fresh shoots and leaves. This, in turn, made it easier for humans to hunt these animals, as they could predict where the animals would congregate after a burn. The impact of firestick farming on the Australian landscape was profound. Over time, it led to significant changes in the composition and distribution of plant species, as fire-adapted plants became more dominant in areas that were regularly burned. Species such as eucalyptus, which are highly resistant to fire, thrived in these conditions, while other plant species that were less fire-tolerant were gradually pushed out of the landscape. This process of ecological change was not necessarily harmful to the environment. In fact, many of Australia's ecosystems have evolved to depend on fire for regeneration. The regular use of fire helped to maintain the health of these ecosystems, preventing the buildup of fuel and reducing the risk of catastrophic wildfires. Firestick farming also had important social and cultural dimensions. The use of fire was deeply embedded in the cultural practices of Indigenous Australians, who developed a sophisticated knowledge of when and how to burn different areas of the landscape. This knowledge was passed down through generations, often in the form of oral traditions, songs, and stories. Elders and knowledge keepers played a key role in teaching younger members of the community about the appropriate times to burn, the types of vegetation that should be targeted, and the ecological consequences of fire. The timing of burns was particularly important, as it had to be aligned with seasonal cycles and the availability of resources. Early Australians were keen observers of the natural world, and they used their understanding of the seasons, weather patterns, and animal migrations to determine the best times to set fires. For example, burns might be conducted at the end of the dry season, when there was enough dry vegetation to fuel the fire, but before the arrival of the wet season, which would help extinguish the fire and promote new growth. In other cases, burns might be timed to coincide with the movement of animals, creating favorable hunting conditions. The role of fire in landscape management also extended to spiritual and cosmological beliefs. Many indigenous Australian cultures viewed fire as a powerful and sacred force, one that was both destructive and regenerative. Fire was often associated with creation stories and ancestral beings, who were believed to have shaped the landscape and its ecosystems through their actions. In this way, the use of firestick farming was not only a practical tool for survival, but also a way of connecting with the land and maintaining the balance between humans and nature. The practice of firestick farming varied across Australia, depending on the specific environmental conditions of each region. In the tropical north, where the climate was hot and humid, fires were used to clear dense vegetation and create open areas for hunting. In the arid interior, fire was used to manage the sparse grasslands and promote the growth of edible plants. In the temperate regions of the southeast, fire was used to maintain open woodlands and prevent the encroachment of dense forests. Despite these regional differences, the underlying principles of fire management were consistent. Fire was used as a tool to shape the landscape in ways that benefited both humans and the environment. The impact of firestick farming on Australian ecosystems is still evident today. Many of the plant and animal species that dominate the Australian landscape are fire-adapted, having evolved to survive and thrive in environments that are regularly burned. For example, eucalyptus trees have thick, fire-resistant bark that protects them from the heat of a fire, while some species of plants rely on fire to trigger the release of their seeds. These adaptations are a testament to the long history of human interaction with the Australian landscape and the role of fire in shaping its ecosystems. However, the use of firestick farming began to decline with the arrival of European settlers in the late 18th century. European colonists, unfamiliar with the role of fire in the Australian landscape, suppressed indigenous burning practices and imposed new land management strategies that prioritized agriculture and grazing. This disruption of traditional fire regimes had significant consequences for the Australian environment. Without the regular, controlled burns that had been practiced for thousands of years, the accumulation of dry vegetation increased, leading to a greater risk of large, destructive wildfires. In recent years, there has been a growing recognition of the value of traditional indigenous fire management practices, particularly in the context of bushfire prevention and land conservation. Indigenous fire knowledge is increasingly being incorporated into modern land management strategies, with indigenous fire practitioners working alongside government agencies and environmental groups to reintroduce controlled burns in a way that respects traditional knowledge and ecological principles. The revival of firestick farming is not only important for the health of Australia's ecosystems, but also for the cultural resurgence of indigenous communities. The practice of using fire to manage the land is a vital part of indigenous Australian identity and cultural heritage, and its reintroduction has helped to strengthen connections between people, land, and culture. Through the continued use of firestick farming, Indigenous Australians are able to reclaim their role as stewards of the land, drawing on thousands of years of knowledge and experience to ensure the sustainability of the environment. In conclusion, firestick farming played a central role in the survival and adaptation of early humans in Australia. By using fire as a tool for landscape management, early Australians were able to shape their environment in ways that supported their subsistence needs, promoted biodiversity, and maintained the health of ecosystems. The use of fire also had important social, cultural, and spiritual dimensions, reflecting a deep connection between humans and the land. As we continue to explore the history of human evolution in Australia, the role of fire serves as a powerful reminder of the ingenuity and resilience of early Australians, and their ability to adapt to and transform the unique landscapes of the continent. Part 8. Language, Culture, and Social Structure. The arrival and subsequent expansion of early humans across Australia were not only marked by environmental adaptations, but also by the development of complex social structures, languages, and cultural practices. These early Australians established intricate systems of kinship, law, and religion, many of which continue to exist among Indigenous Australian communities today. In this part, we explore how the first Australians organised their societies, developed languages, and created rich cultural traditions that were deeply intertwined with their environment and their worldview. One of the most significant aspects of early Australian society was its highly developed social structure. Early Australians lived in small, mobile groups, often referred to as bands, that were connected through larger networks of kinship and social alliances. These bands typically consisted of extended families, and their size could vary depending on the availability of resources in a given area. In regions where resources were abundant, such as along the coasts or in fertile river valleys, bands could be larger and more sedentary, while in more arid or resource-scarce areas, bands were smaller and more mobile. Kinship was the foundation of social organization in early Australian societies. Kinship systems determined not only familial relationships, but also social responsibilities, marriage rules, and the distribution of resources. These systems were complex, with intricate rules governing how individuals related to one another and how they interacted with different groups. Kinship also played a central role in the transmission of knowledge, including the ecological knowledge necessary for survival in Australia's diverse environments. Elders and knowledge keepers were responsible for passing down this knowledge to younger generations, often through oral traditions, stories, and ceremonies. Marriage rules were an important aspect of kinship systems, as they helped to maintain social cohesion and prevent conflict between groups. In many indigenous Australian societies, marriage was governed by exogamy, meaning that individuals were required to marry outside of their immediate kin group. This practice helped to strengthen alliances between different groups, ensuring cooperation and the sharing of resources. Marriage was often accompanied by complex rituals and ceremonies, which served to formalize the union and reinforce social bonds. Social structure was also closely tied to the land, with groups holding specific territories that were passed down through generations. These territories, often referred to as country, were not just physical spaces but also held deep cultural and spiritual significance. Each group had a responsibility to care for their country, managing its resources and maintaining its health. This relationship between people and land was reinforced through ritual and ceremony, which helped to ensure that the balance between humans and the environment was maintained. One of the most remarkable aspects of early Australian societies was the diversity of languages spoken across the continent. At the time of European contact in the late 18th century, there were an estimated 250 distinct indigenous languages in Australia, each with its own dialects and variations. These languages were not isolated but were part of larger language families, suggesting long-standing connections and interactions between different groups. The diversity of languages in Australia reflects the deep cultural complexity of early Australian societies and their ability to adapt to different environments while maintaining distinct cultural identities. Language played a central role in the transmission of knowledge, particularly ecological and spiritual knowledge. Much of the knowledge that early Australians held about their environment, such as the seasonal cycles, the behavior of animals, and the use of plants for food and medicine, was encoded in their languages. This knowledge was often passed down through stories, songs, and oral traditions, which not only served to educate younger generations, but also to reinforce the cultural values and beliefs of the community. One of the most important cultural practices of early Australians was the telling of dreaming stories, or what is often referred to as the dream time. The dreaming is a complex system of beliefs that explains the creation of the world, the origins of humans and animals, and the laws that govern the natural and social world. According to dreaming beliefs, ancestral beings created the land, its features, and all living things during a time long ago. These beings are believed to have traveled across the land, shaping its landscapes and leaving behind sacred sites that continue to hold cultural and spiritual significance for Indigenous Australians today. The dreaming is not a single, unified belief system, but rather a collection of stories and traditions that vary between different groups. Each group has its own dreaming stories that are specific to their country, reflecting their unique relationship with the land and its features. These stories often explain the origins of specific animals, plants, and landforms, as well as the rules and laws that humans must follow to live in harmony with the environment. The dreaming also serves as a guide for social and moral behavior, providing a framework for understanding the relationships between people, animals, and the land. Ceremony and ritual were integral parts of life for early Australians, providing a way to connect with the land, the ancestors, and the spiritual world. Ceremonies were held to mark important events, such as births, deaths, and marriages, as well as seasonal changes and the movement of animals. These ceremonies often involved dancing, singing, and storytelling, and they were an opportunity for people to come together, strengthen social bonds, and reaffirm their connection to the land. Art was another important cultural practice for early Australians, and it played a key role in expressing spiritual and cultural beliefs. The rock art of Australia, some of which dates back tens of thousands of years, provides a visual record of the lives and beliefs of early Australians. This art, often created on the walls of caves or on rock surfaces, depicts animals, humans, and mythical beings, as well as abstract symbols and patterns. Many of the animals depicted in the art are now extinct, providing valuable evidence of the interaction between early humans and the megafauna of Australia. Rock art was not merely decorative. It served as a form of communication, storytelling, and record-keeping. Some rock art sites are associated with dreaming stories and are considered sacred, while others may have been created as part of initiation ceremonies or other important cultural events. The creation of rock art was a communal activity, with different members of the community contributing to the artwork and passing down the skills and techniques required to produce it. In addition to rock art, early Australians created a wide range of other artistic and cultural expressions, including body painting, sand drawings, and the making of ceremonial objects such as totem poles and headdresses. These forms of art were often closely tied to ritual and ceremony, serving as a way to honor the ancestors, connect with the spiritual world, and express cultural identity. The social and cultural complexity of early Australian societies is also reflected in their legal systems, known as customary law. Customary law governed all aspects of life, from marriage and family relationships to resource management and conflict resolution. These laws were not written down but were passed down through oral traditions and enforced through social norms and rituals. Elders and knowledge keepers played a key role in interpreting and enforcing customary law, ensuring that the rules of the community were upheld and that disputes were resolved in a fair and just manner. Customary law was closely tied to the land, with specific rules governing the use and management of natural resources. For example, certain areas of land might be designated as sacred or restricted, with only certain individuals or groups allowed to access them. Similarly, there were rules about when and where certain animals could be hunted, ensuring that resources were not depleted and that the balance between humans and the environment was maintained. These laws reflected a deep understanding of the ecological cycles of the land and the need to live sustainably within its limits. The development of language, culture, and social structure among early Australians was not static. It was dynamic and adaptive, shaped by the changing environments and challenges they encountered. As groups spread across the continent, they developed distinct cultural practices and traditions, while also maintaining connections with other groups through trade, marriage, and ceremonial gatherings. These interactions helped to foster a rich and diverse cultural landscape, one that continues to thrive among Indigenous Australian communities today. In conclusion, the social and cultural complexity of early Australian societies is a testament to their resilience, adaptability, and deep connection to the land. Through their kinship systems, languages, and cultural practices, early Australians created a rich and vibrant way of life that allowed them to thrive in some of the most diverse and challenging environments on Earth. Their understanding of the land, their use of fire to manage the environment, and their spiritual beliefs about the dreaming all played a central role in shaping their societies and ensuring their survival. As we continue this narrative, we will explore the origins of Aboriginal art and spirituality, and how these cultural practices were passed down through generations, leaving a lasting legacy on the Australian landscape. Part 9. The origins of Aboriginal art and spirituality. Aboriginal art and spirituality are among the oldest continuous cultural traditions in the world, with some rock art sites in Australia dating back over 40,000 years. These art forms, deeply connected to the land and the dreaming, offer a window into the spiritual beliefs, social structures, and daily lives of early Australians. In this part of the narrative, we delve into the origins of Aboriginal art and spirituality, exploring how early Australians used art as a means of expression, communication, and connection to the land, their ancestors, and the cosmos. Aboriginal art is diverse, spanning a wide range of mediums, from rock art and body painting to sand drawings and ceremonial objects. Perhaps the most famous and well-studied form of Aboriginal art is rock art, which can be found in thousands of sites across the continent. These paintings and carvings, etched into rock surfaces, provide an invaluable record of the lives and beliefs of early Australians. Some rock art sites have been continuously used for tens of thousands of years, with new layers of paintings added over time, creating a rich tapestry of cultural history. Rock art is more than just decoration. It serves as a visual language that encodes knowledge about the natural world, social relationships, and spiritual beliefs. Many of the images depicted in rock art are symbolic, representing animals, humans, and mythical beings from the dreaming. These images are often highly stylized, with distinctive shapes, colors, and patterns that vary between different regions and groups. The use of ochre, a naturally occurring pigment, is particularly significant in Aboriginal art. Ochre was used to create the vibrant reds, yellows, and browns that dominate many rock paintings, and its use is closely tied to ritual and ceremonial practices. One of the most famous rock art traditions in Australia is the X-ray style of painting, which originated in the Arnhem Land region of the Northern Territory. In this style, animals and humans are depicted with their internal organs and skeletal structures visible, as if viewed through an X-ray. This technique not only demonstrates the artistic skill of early Australians, but also reflects their deep knowledge of the anatomy and behavior of the animals they hunted. X-ray paintings often depict important food animals, such as kangaroos, fish, and turtles, highlighting the central role of these animals in the diet and culture of the region's inhabitants. Another important tradition in Aboriginal art is the use of abstract symbols and geometric patterns, which are often associated with the dreaming. These symbols can represent a wide range of concepts, from specific animals and plants to natural features like rivers and mountains, as well as broader spiritual themes. In some cases, these symbols are used to create maps of the landscape, depicting the locations of waterholes, hunting grounds, and sacred sites. These maps were not just practical guides, they also served as representations of the spiritual world, showing how the land was created by ancestral beings and how it should be cared for by humans. The creation of rock art was closely tied to ritual and ceremony, and many rock art sites are considered sacred. These sites often correspond to locations that are important in the dreaming, where ancestral beings are believed to have created the landscape or performed significant acts. By painting images of these beings and their stories, early Australians were not only recording their beliefs, but also maintaining a connection with the spiritual world. The act of painting itself was often seen as a form of communication with the ancestors, a way of honoring their presence and asking for their guidance and protection. In addition to rock art, Aboriginal art traditions include body painting, sand drawings, and the creation of ceremonial objects. Body painting was a common practice in many Aboriginal ceremonies, particularly those associated with initiation, marriage, and death. The patterns and colors used in body painting were often specific to certain groups or individuals, and could convey important information about a person's status, family ties, or spiritual connections. For example, specific patterns might be associated with a particular dreaming story or sacred site, and wearing these patterns during a ceremony would help to reaffirm the individual's relationship with the land and their ancestors. Sand drawings, like body painting, were often created during ceremonies and were used to depict important stories, symbols, and maps of the landscape. These drawings were typically temporary, created on the ground using sand, stones, and other natural materials. They were an important part of many initiation and healing ceremonies, serving as visual aids that helped participants to understand the teachings of the dreaming and their role within the community. Once the ceremony was completed, the drawings would often be erased, symbolizing the impermanence of life and the constant cycle of creation and destruction that is central to Aboriginal spirituality. The creation of ceremonial objects, such as totem poles, headdresses, and weapons, was another important aspect of Aboriginal art and spirituality. These objects were often imbued with spiritual significance, representing ancestral beings, totem animals, or important events from the dreaming. They were used in ceremonies to connect with the spiritual world and to ensure the continued health and prosperity of the community. Totem poles, for example, were often carved with images of animals or other symbols associated with a particular group's totem, a spiritual being or force that was believed to watch over and protect the group. These poles were not only works of art, but also powerful symbols of the group's identity and their relationship with the land and its creatures. The spiritual beliefs of early Australians were deeply tied to the concept of the dreaming, which encompasses the creation of the world, the origins of humans and animals, and the laws that govern the natural and social world. According to dreaming beliefs, ancestral beings traveled across the land in a time long ago, shaping the landscape and leaving behind sacred sites that continue to hold cultural and spiritual significance. These beings are believed to exist outside of time, with their actions in the dreaming continuing to influence the present and future. The dreaming is not a single, unified belief system, but rather a collection of stories and traditions that vary between different groups. Each group has its own dreaming stories that are specific to their country, reflecting their unique relationship with the land and its features. These stories often explain the origins of specific animals, plants, and landforms, as well as the rules and laws that humans must follow to live in harmony with the environment. The dreaming also serves as a guide for social and moral behavior, providing a framework for understanding the relationships between people, animals, and the land. One of the most important roles of the dreaming is to explain the origins of the land and its features. Many dreaming stories are associated with specific landforms, such as rivers, mountains, and rock formations, which are believed to have been created by ancestral beings. These sites are considered sacred and are often the focus of rituals and ceremonies designed to maintain the balance between humans and the natural world. The care and protection of these sacred sites are a central responsibility for many Indigenous Australian groups, and the stories associated with them are passed down through generations to ensure their continued significance. The dreaming also provides a framework for understanding the relationships between humans and animals. Many Indigenous Australian groups have totemic systems, in which individuals or groups are associated with specific animals or natural forces. These totems are considered spiritual ancestors, and they are believed to provide guidance and protection to the people who are connected to them. The relationship between humans and their totems is reciprocal, with people having a responsibility to care for and protect their totem species, just as the totem provides for them. This system of totemism reinforces the interconnectedness of all living things and the importance of maintaining balance and harmony within the natural world. Ceremonies and rituals associated with the dreaming are an important way for Indigenous Australians to maintain their connection to the land and the spiritual world. These ceremonies often involve storytelling, singing, dancing, and the creation of art, and they serve as a way to pass down knowledge, reinforce social bonds, and ensure the continued health and prosperity of the community. Many of these ceremonies are held at sacred sites that are associated with dreaming stories, and they are seen as a way of renewing the relationship between humans and the ancestral beings who created the land. In conclusion, the origins of Aboriginal art and spirituality are deeply rooted in the relationship between early Australians and the land. Through their art, rituals, and stories, early Australians expressed their connection to the natural world, their ancestors, and the spiritual forces that govern their lives. The dreaming provided a framework for understanding the creation of the world and the laws that humans must follow to live in harmony with the environment. These beliefs and practices continue to play a central role in the cultural life of Indigenous Australians today, providing a rich and enduring legacy of the first Australians' relationship with their land and their spirituality. Part 10. Climate change and its impact on early Australians. As early Australians spread across the continent, they encountered significant climate fluctuations that shaped their environment and way of life. The Pleistocene epoch, which spanned from about 2.6 million years ago to 11,700 years ago, was characterized by dramatic shifts in climate, including periods of glaciation, increased aridity, and changes in sea levels. These environmental changes had a profound impact on the ecosystems of Australia and the strategies that early humans employed to survive. In this part of the narrative, we explore how early Australians adapted to the challenges posed by climate change, the role of environmental shifts in shaping human populations, and the long-term consequences for the continent's flora, fauna, and human inhabitants. The climate of Australia during the Pleistocene was highly variable, with alternating periods of cooler, wetter conditions and warmer, drier intervals. These fluctuations were driven by global climatic events, including the advance and retreat of ice sheets in the Northern Hemisphere, which had far-reaching effects on weather patterns across the globe. While Australia itself did not experience large ice sheets like those found in Europe and North America, the continent was still affected by shifts in temperature and precipitation, which influenced everything from vegetation growth to the availability of water and food. One of the most significant challenges for early Australians was the increasing aridity that characterized much of the continent during the late Pleistocene. As global temperatures dropped and ice sheets expanded, much of the water that would have otherwise fallen as rain or snow was locked up in glaciers, leading to drier conditions across large parts of Australia. Lakes and rivers shrank, wetlands dried up, and the once fertile interior of the continent became more arid, transforming into the desert landscapes that we associate with the Australian outback today. The drying of the landscape had a profound impact on early human populations, particularly in the arid interior. In these regions, water sources became scarcer, forcing early Australians to develop new strategies for locating and conserving water. Archaeological evidence suggests that early humans were highly skilled at finding water, using natural springs, waterholes, and underground aquifers to sustain themselves in even the harshest environments. In some cases, they may have dug wells or used specialized tools to extract water from plants. These water-finding skills were essential for survival in an increasingly arid environment, where the availability of fresh water could mean the difference between life and death. In addition to finding water, early Australians had to adapt their subsistence strategies to cope with the changing availability of food. As the climate became drier, the vegetation that once supported large populations of herbivores began to disappear, leading to a decline in the populations of animals such as kangaroos, emus, and other game species. This forced early humans to diversify their diet, relying more heavily on plant foods, small animals, and aquatic resources such as fish and shellfish. In some regions, particularly along the coasts, early Australians turned to the ocean for sustenance, developing new techniques for fishing and gathering marine resources. The effects of climate change were not uniform across Australia. While the interior became increasingly arid, other regions, such as the tropical north and the temperate southeast, experienced relatively stable climates, with abundant rainfall and rich ecosystems. These areas served as refuges for both humans and animals during periods of environmental stress, providing important resources that helped sustain populations during times of drought or food scarcity. Archaeological evidence suggests that early Australians may have practiced seasonal migration, moving between regions in response to the availability of water and food. This mobility allowed them to exploit different environments at different times of the year, ensuring their survival even in the face of significant climatic challenges. The impact of climate change on Australia's megafauna has been a topic of ongoing debate among scientists. As discussed in previous parts, the extinction of Australia's megafauna, including giant kangaroos, diprotodons, and the fearsome megalania, occurred around the same time as the arrival of humans and the onset of increasing aridity during the late Pleistocene. While some researchers argue that human hunting played a major role in the extinction of these species, others suggest that climate change was the primary driver. According to the climate change hypothesis, the increasingly dry conditions of the late Pleistocene put significant pressure on the megafauna, which were already adapted to a relatively stable, wetter climate. As water sources dried up and vegetation became more sparse, the large herbivores that made up much of the megafauna's diet began to decline. This, in turn, affected the populations of large carnivores, which relied on these herbivores for food. The combination of declining food resources, increased competition, and the physiological stress of living in a hotter, drier environment likely contributed to the extinction of many megafauna species. For early humans, the extinction of the megafauna would have had significant ecological and cultural consequences. These large animals were important sources of food, materials, and potentially even spiritual significance for early Australians. Their disappearance would have forced human populations to adapt their hunting and gathering strategies, focusing on smaller animals and plant foods. This shift in subsistence patterns is reflected in the archaeological record, where we see changes in tool technology and the types of animals being hunted over time. For example, as large game species became scarcer, early Australians developed new tools for hunting smaller animals, such as boomerangs and spear throwers, which allowed for greater accuracy and efficiency in hunting. The long-term effects of climate change on Australia's ecosystems were profound. The drying of the landscape not only contributed to the extinction of the megafauna, but also led to significant changes in the composition of plant and animal communities. Fire, which was already a natural part of the Australian environment, became even more important as the landscape became drier and more prone to wildfires. Early Australians adapted to these conditions by developing firestick farming, using controlled burns to manage vegetation, promote the growth of edible plants, and create favorable conditions for hunting. The use of fire in landscape management had both ecological and cultural implications. On one hand, it helped to mitigate the effects of climate change by reducing the risk of large, uncontrolled wildfires and promoting biodiversity in the landscape. On the other hand, it reinforced the spiritual and cultural connection that early Australians had with the land. Fire was not only a practical tool for survival, but also a sacred force, one that was deeply embedded in the dreaming and the laws that governed human interaction with the environment. Despite the challenges posed by climate change, early Australians demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability. Their ability to survive in some of the most arid and inhospitable environments on Earth is a testament to their ingenuity, resourcefulness, and deep understanding of the land. They developed a wide range of technologies, from water-finding techniques to sophisticated tools for hunting and gathering, that allowed them to thrive even in the face of environmental stress. Their social and cultural systems, which were closely tied to the land and its cycles, provided the framework for cooperation and resource sharing, ensuring the survival of their communities. The end of the Pleistocene, around 11,700 years ago, marked a major turning point in the climate and environment of Australia. As the Earth entered the Holocene epoch, global temperatures began to rise, leading to the retreat of ice sheets and the stabilization of sea levels. In Australia, this warming trend led to further drying of the landscape, particularly in the interior, while coastal regions experienced rising sea levels and the flooding of low-lying areas. The land bridge between Australia and Tasmania was submerged, isolating the people of Tasmania from the mainland. This period of environmental change would continue to shape the lives of Indigenous Australians for millennia, influencing their subsistence strategies, social structures, and cultural practices. In conclusion, climate change played a central role in shaping the environments and societies of early Australia. The increasingly arid conditions of the late Pleistocene forced early humans to adapt their subsistence strategies, develop new technologies, and manage their resources more carefully. Despite these challenges, early Australians demonstrated remarkable resilience, using their knowledge of the land and its cycles to survive and thrive in an ever-changing environment. The legacy of their adaptability and resourcefulness continues to be reflected in the cultural traditions and ecological knowledge of Indigenous Australians today. As we move forward in this narrative, we will explore how early Australians managed their social systems and passed down their knowledge through art, oral traditions, and social organization. Part 11. Human Resilience and Survival Through Innovation. As the climate of Australia shifted through the late Pleistocene and into the Holocene, early Australians faced an array of environmental challenges. These challenges included fluctuating water availability, the extinction of megafauna, and the gradual transformation of the landscape. Despite these hardships, early Australians demonstrated remarkable resilience through a series of technological, social, and cultural innovations that enabled them to survive in some of the most demanding environments on Earth. This part of the narrative focuses on the innovations that allowed early Australians to adapt to changing conditions, manage scarce resources, and maintain social cohesion, ensuring their long-term survival. One of the most significant challenges for early Australians was the increasing aridity of the continent, particularly in the interior. As global temperatures fluctuated and water became scarcer, early humans developed a variety of strategies to locate, conserve, and manage this vital resource. Water management was central to survival in arid and semi-arid regions, and early Australians demonstrated a deep understanding of their environment and the natural cycles of water availability. In the arid interior, where rivers and lakes were often ephemeral and seasonal, early humans relied on a combination of natural and constructed water sources. Natural springs and waterholes, known as soaks, provided a crucial source of water during dry periods, and these were often mapped out and maintained by indigenous communities. The use of soakage wells, which involved digging down to access underground water reserves, allowed early Australians to tap into hidden water sources, ensuring a more reliable supply in times of drought. These water sources were often carefully managed and protected, with strict social and cultural rules governing their use to prevent overexploitation. In regions where water was more plentiful, such as along the coasts and in riverine environments, early Australians developed sophisticated methods for managing and utilizing aquatic resources. Fishing became an important part of the diet in coastal areas, with early Australians using a variety of tools and techniques to catch fish, shellfish, and other marine animals. Fish traps, made from stones or woven materials, were constructed in rivers and estuaries to capture fish as they moved with the tides or currents. These traps were often built communally and passed down through generations, reflecting the importance of cooperation in resource management. Aquatic resources were not limited to coastal areas. Early Australians also exploited inland rivers, lakes, and wetlands, particularly in the more temperate regions of the southeast. The Murray-Darling Basin, for example, was a rich source of food for early Australians, providing fish, waterfowl, and plant foods such as tubers and seeds. In these regions, fishing and gathering were often supplemented by hunting land animals, creating a diverse and flexible subsistence strategy that allowed early Australians to thrive even in the face of environmental variability. The extinction of the megafauna also forced early Australians to adapt their hunting and gathering strategies. With the disappearance of large game animals like Diprotodon and Megalania, early humans turned their focus to smaller, more abundant species. Kangaroos, wallabies, and emus became key food sources, along with a wide variety of smaller animals such as possums, bandicoots, and reptiles. Hunting techniques evolved in response to these changes, with early Australians developing specialized tools and weapons that allowed them to hunt smaller, faster-moving prey more efficiently. One of the most important technological innovations of early Australians was the development of the woomera, or spear thrower. The woomera allowed hunters to throw spears with greater force and accuracy over longer distances, making it easier to catch elusive prey. The use of the woomera also reflected a broader shift towards more efficient, lightweight tools that were well suited to the nomadic lifestyle of early Australians. This tool became a critical part of the hunter's toolkit, providing a versatile and effective means of hunting a wide range of animals. Another significant innovation was the use of traps and snares to capture small animals. These traps were often simple but effective, using natural materials such as vines, branches, and stones to create devices that could catch animals as they moved through the landscape. Trapping allowed early Australians to capture animals without expending significant energy, freeing up time and resources for other tasks. In some regions, early Australians also practiced communal hunting, working together to herd animals into enclosures or towards natural barriers where they could be more easily killed. Plant foods were another critical component of the diet for early Australians, and their knowledge of edible plants was extensive. Early Australians harvested a wide variety of plant foods, including fruits, seeds, tubers, and nuts, many of which required careful preparation to be made edible. Some plants, such as cycads, contained toxins that had to be removed through processes such as leaching or roasting before they could be consumed. The preparation of these foods was often labor-intensive and required specialized knowledge, which was passed down through generations. The development of grinding stones allowed early Australians to process plant foods more efficiently, particularly seeds and nuts that were difficult to digest in their raw form. These grinding stones, which were used to crush and grind plant materials into flour or paste, were found in archaeological sites across Australia, reflecting the widespread importance of plant foods in early diets. In addition to grinding stones, early Australians developed other tools for processing food, such as stone axes and knives, which were used for cutting, scraping, and preparing animal hides and plant materials. Innovation was not limited to technology. Early Australians also developed sophisticated social and cultural systems that enabled them to manage resources and maintain social cohesion. Kinship networks, trade, and cooperation were essential for survival, particularly in regions where resources were scarce or unpredictable. These networks allowed groups to share resources, knowledge, and labor, ensuring that even in times of environmental stress, individuals and communities had access to the resources they needed. Trade networks were particularly important for the exchange of valuable materials such as ochre, stone, and shells, which were used for a variety of purposes, from tool-making to ritual and ceremonial activities. Ochre, for example, was highly prized for its use in body painting, rock art, and burial practices, and it was often traded over long distances between groups. Stone, especially high-quality materials like chert and quartzite, was also an important trade commodity, as it was used to make tools and weapons. Cooperation was also central to the management of shared resources, such as water and hunting grounds. In many regions, early Australians practiced communal land management, with specific areas of land being cared for and used by different groups according to strict cultural and social rules. These rules ensured that resources were used sustainably, with measures in place to prevent overhunting, overharvesting, or the depletion of water sources. Elders and knowledge keepers played a key role in maintaining these systems, passing down knowledge about the land, its cycles, and its resources to younger generations. Ceremony and ritual were integral to the social and cultural life of early Australians and played an important role in maintaining social cohesion. Many ceremonies were held to mark important events such as births, deaths, and marriages, as well as seasonal changes and the movement of animals. These ceremonies often involved singing, dancing, storytelling, and the creation of art, and they served to reinforce social bonds, transmit knowledge, and ensure the continued health and prosperity of the community. Innovation was not limited to physical survival. Early Australians also developed complex belief systems that helped them navigate the challenges of life in an unpredictable and sometimes harsh environment. The dreaming, or dream time, provided a framework for understanding the world and the human place within it, offering guidance on how to live in harmony with the land and its creatures. The stories of the dreaming were not static but evolved over time, adapting to the changing landscape and the experiences of the people who lived on it. These stories helped early Australians to make sense of their environment, offering explanations for natural phenomena such as the changing seasons, the movement of animals, and the availability of food and water. In conclusion, early Australians demonstrated extraordinary resilience and adaptability through a combination of technological innovation, social cooperation, and cultural creativity. Their ability to develop new tools, manage resources, and maintain social cohesion allowed them to survive and thrive in some of the most challenging environments on Earth. The innovations of early Australians were not limited to practical solutions for survival, but also encompassed a rich cultural and spiritual life, with art, ceremony, and storytelling playing central roles in their societies. These traditions continue to endure among Indigenous Australians today, reflecting the deep connections between people, land, and culture that have shaped Australia's history for tens of thousands of years. Part 12. The Legacy of the First Australians. The story of human evolution in Australia is one of extraordinary resilience, innovation, and deep cultural connection to the land. Over tens of thousands of years, the first Australians not only survived in a vast and often harsh environment, but also thrived, developing complex societies, rich spiritual traditions, and sustainable ways of managing the land. The legacy of these first Australians endures today in the ongoing cultural and spiritual practices of Indigenous Australians, whose deep knowledge of the land continues to inform modern approaches to environmental management and cultural preservation. One of the most enduring legacies of the first Australians is their relationship with the land. For tens of thousands of years, early Australians lived in harmony with their environment, using sustainable practices to manage resources and ensure the continued health of the ecosystems on which they relied. This relationship with the land was not simply one of resource extraction. It was deeply spiritual, with the land itself seen as a living entity, imbued with the presence of ancestral beings from the dreaming. The care and stewardship of the land was central to the survival of early Australians, and this responsibility was passed down through generations as part of their cultural and spiritual traditions. The concept of country in Indigenous Australian cultures embodies this deep connection to the land. Country is not just a physical place, but a spiritual and cultural landscape that holds the stories of ancestors, the laws of the dreaming, and the knowledge of how to live sustainably within the environment. Each group had its own country, with specific responsibilities for its care and management. The relationship between people and country was reciprocal. Just as the land provided for the people were responsible for maintaining the health and balance of the land. This understanding of the land as a living, interconnected system is one of the most important legacies of the first Australians and remains a guiding principle for many Indigenous communities today. The use of fire stick farming, as discussed earlier, is a prime example of how early Australians managed the land in a sustainable way. By using controlled burns to promote the growth of edible plants, create hunting grounds, and reduce the risk of wildfires, early Australians were able to shape their environment in ways that benefited both humans and the natural world. This practice not only ensured a steady supply of food, but also maintained the health of the ecosystems in which they lived. The knowledge of how to use fire effectively was passed down through generations, with specific rules about when, where, and how to burn the land to achieve the desired effects. The legacy of fire management continues to be relevant today, as modern Australia grapples with the increasing frequency and intensity of bushfires. Indigenous fire management practices, often referred to as cultural burning, are now being recognized for their potential to reduce the risk of large-scale wildfires and promote biodiversity. Indigenous fire practitioners are working alongside government agencies and environmental groups to reintroduce these practices, drawing on thousands of years of knowledge and experience. This collaboration between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians represents a growing recognition of the value of traditional ecological knowledge in addressing modern environmental challenges. The first Australians also left behind a rich cultural legacy, particularly in the form of art, oral traditions, and spiritual practices. The rock art that can be found across the continent, some of which dates back tens of thousands of years, provides a visual record of the lives and beliefs of early Australians. These artworks depict animals, humans, and mythical beings, offering insight into the spiritual world of the dreaming and the connection between people and the land. The preservation of rock art sites is an important part of maintaining Indigenous cultural heritage, and many of these sites are now protected as part of national parks and heritage listings. In addition to rock art, the oral traditions of Indigenous Australians have played a crucial role in preserving knowledge and culture. These stories, songs, and ceremonies have been passed down through generations, keeping alive the teachings of the dreaming and the history of the people. Oral traditions are not just historical records. They are living practices that continue to evolve and adapt to the changing world. Through storytelling, Indigenous Australians maintain their connection to their ancestors, their country, and the laws that govern their relationships with each other and the natural world. The resilience of Indigenous Australian cultures, despite the many challenges they have faced, is a testament to the strength and adaptability of the first Australians. The arrival of European settlers in the late 18th century brought profound changes to the lives of Indigenous Australians, including the dispossession of land, the disruption of cultural practices, and the introduction of new diseases. Yet, despite these challenges, Indigenous Australians have continued to practice their cultural traditions, maintain their connection to the land, and advocate for their rights and sovereignty. The modern movement for Indigenous land rights and cultural preservation is deeply connected to the legacy of the first Australians. For many Indigenous Australians, the fight for land rights is not just about reclaiming physical territory, but also about restoring the cultural and spiritual relationship with country that has been disrupted by colonization. Land is central to Indigenous identity, and the ability to manage and care for their land is seen as a fundamental part of cultural survival. The return of land to Indigenous communities, through legal recognition of native title and land rights claims, is an important step in addressing the historical injustices of colonization and supporting the cultural resurgence of Indigenous Australians. In recent decades, there has been a growing recognition of the importance of Indigenous knowledge in environmental management, education, and cultural heritage. Indigenous Australians have been at the forefront of efforts to protect biodiversity, manage natural resources sustainably, and preserve cultural sites. Indigenous ranger programs, which employ Indigenous people to manage protected areas and conserve wildlife, are an example of how traditional knowledge can be integrated with modern conservation practices. These programs not only help to protect Australia's unique ecosystems, but also provide opportunities for Indigenous communities to reconnect with their land and culture. The legacy of the first Australians also extends to the broader Australian society, where there is increasing recognition of the value of Indigenous culture, art, and knowledge. Indigenous art, particularly painting, sculpture, and performance, has gained international recognition for its beauty and cultural significance. Exhibitions of Indigenous art are featured in galleries and museums around the world, providing a platform for Indigenous artists to share their stories and perspectives with a global audience. This recognition of Indigenous art is not just about aesthetics. It is also about acknowledging the deep cultural knowledge and spiritual connections that underpin these works. Education is another area where the legacy of the first Australians is being increasingly recognized. Efforts to include Indigenous history, culture, and perspectives in the Australian school curriculum are helping to build greater understanding and respect for the contributions of Indigenous Australians. By teaching students about the rich history of Australia's first peoples, including their innovations in land management, art, and social organisation, educators are helping to challenge stereotypes and promote a more inclusive understanding of Australian history. The legacy of the first Australians is not only about the past, it is also about the future. Indigenous Australians continue to be at the forefront of movements for environmental justice, cultural resurgence, and political sovereignty. Their knowledge of the land, passed down through millennia, offers valuable lessons for how to live sustainably in a rapidly changing world. As the impacts of climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation become increasingly apparent, the wisdom of the first Australians offers a path forward for building a more sustainable and equitable future. In conclusion, the legacy of the first Australians is one of resilience, innovation, and deep cultural connection to the land. Their sustainable land management practices, rich cultural traditions, and spiritual beliefs have left an indelible mark on Australia's history and continue to shape the lives of Indigenous Australians today. As we look to the future, the knowledge and wisdom of the first Australians offer important lessons for how to care for the land, live in harmony with nature, and ensure the survival of both human and ecological communities. The legacy of the first Australians is not just a story of the past. It is a living tradition that continues to guide and inspire. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the story of Australia's first humans. We hope you've gained insight into their resilience, innovation, and deep connection to the land. Stay tuned for more fascinating explorations of human history and culture. Until next time, keep exploring and learning.